You're not unmotivated, you're carrying invisible pressure. There are days when even small tasks feel heavy, not impossible, just heavy. You sit down to start something simple, and instead of energy, you feel a quiet weight. You call it lack of motivation, but deep down, it doesn't feel like laziness. It feels like carrying something you can't quite see or explain, and what most people never realize is this. Sometimes the problem isn't motivation at all. Sometimes the problem is pressure you stopped noticing long ago. Invisible pressure doesn't look dramatic, it looks like hesitation, like overthinking before sending a message. Like delaying decisions that should be easy. You tell yourself, I'll do it later, I need to think more, I'm just tired today. But underneath those thoughts, something else is happening. Every action starts to feel like it carries consequences, not just practical consequences, emotional ones. If this doesn't work, what does it say about me? If I make the wrong choice, what will people think? If I slow down, will I fall behind? Over time, this changes how you see yourself. You stop trusting your decisions. You start measuring yourself constantly. You feel tense, even when nothing urgent is happening. Psychologists sometimes call this chronic evaluative pressure, a state where the brain continuously monitors performance, even in low-stakes situations. And the exhausting part is this. The pressure often isn't coming from the outside anymore. It's coming from inside your own mind, which raises a quiet question. If no one is forcing you, why does the pressure still feel so real? You are not weak for feeling this way. In many cases, invisible pressure is something you learned. The brain is shaped by repeated experiences. And when you grow up in environments where performance, responsibility, or expectations were high, your nervous system adapts. It learns to stay alert, to anticipate mistakes, to prepare for judgment before it happens. From a behavioral psychology perspective, this is conditioning. When approval, safety, or stability depend on doing things right, the brain learns to associate effort with evaluation. So even years later, when the environment changes, the internal system remains. What feels like lack of motivation is often mental fatigue from carrying that system all day, not a flaw, an adaptation. But adaptations that once protected you can eventually drain you. And to understand why the pressure feels so constant, you have to see how the brain handles responsibility and uncertainty. The brain is designed to predict and prevent threats, not only physical threats, social and emotional ones too. Neuroscience shows that the interior cingulate cortex and amygdala become active not just during danger, but during uncertainty and evaluation. In simple terms, the brain treats "what if I fail" as a form of threat. Here's a metaphor. Imagine carrying a backpack. At first, it holds only a few books. You barely notice it. But every expectation, every fear of disappointing someone, every moment of self-criticism adds another book. The weight increases slowly, so slowly that you don't notice when it becomes heavy. And here's the mental model. Motivation is energy, pressure is weight. When weight increases, movement slows, not because the legs stopped working, but because the load became heavier. The brain uses energy to manage stress and monitor performance. When too much energy goes into monitoring, less remains for action. That's why tasks feel harder to start, not because you don't care, but because part of your mind is already exhausted before you begin. Which means the solution isn't pushing harder, it's learning to reduce the weight. But how do you reduce something you can't see? Step 1, notice the pressure instead of the task, what to do. Before starting something difficult, pause and ask, what am I expecting from myself right now? Be honest. Is it perfection, speed, proving something, why it works? Cognitive psychology shows that bringing implicit expectations into awareness reduces their emotional intensity. When expectations stay unconscious, they control behavior silently. Example, you sit down to write and realize you're expecting the first draft to be excellent. The pressure drops slightly once you see it clearly. Awareness doesn't remove pressure instantly, but it loosens its grip, and that small shift creates space. Step 2, reduce the scope of responsibility. What to do? Define the smallest meaningful step, not the complete outcome. Focus on starting, not finishing. Why it works. The brain perceives large, undefined tasks as threats because they lack clear boundaries. Breaking tasks into small steps reduces perceived uncertainty, calming threat responses. Example. Instead of finish the project, you decide to work for 10 minutes. 10 minutes feels manageable, and manageable feels safe. Safety is what allows movement. Step 3, externalize the pressure, what to do. Write down everything you feel responsible for in one list, not just tasks, expectations, worries, and mental obligations. Why it works. Working memory in the brain is limited. When responsibilities stay in your head, the brain repeatedly rehearses them, increasing stress hormones like cortisol. Writing them down moves them from emotional processing to visual processing, reducing mental load. Example: you list, reply to emails, call family, improve skills, save money, be productive every day. Seeing it written reveals something important. You've been carrying all of this at once, and no mind carries that lightly. Step 4. Separate rest from guilt. What to do: schedule small periods of rest intentionally, not as escape. Rest with permission, not avoidance. Why it works: when rest is associated with guilt, the brain never fully recovers. Research on recovery cycles shows that genuine rest restores dopamine and mental energy, improving motivation naturally. Example: instead of scrolling while feeling anxious, you take a deliberate 15-minute break, then return. The quality of rest changes the quality of effort. Step 5. Redefine progress. What to do: measure progress by consistency, not intensity. Ask, did I show up today? Not, was I perfect today? Why it works. Behavioral psychology shows that consistent small actions reinforce identity through habit loops in the basal ganglia. Intensity burns out, consistency builds momentum. Example: working 20 minutes daily feels small. But after weeks it becomes automatic, and automatic actions require far less energy. Momentum doesn't feel dramatic, it feels quiet. Think of invisible pressure like gravity. You don't see it, but you feel its pull in every movement. And when gravity feels stronger than usual, the answer isn't to jump higher, it's to lighten what you're carrying. Pressure, expectations, and self-judgment add weight. Awareness, smaller steps, and realistic standards remove it. Motivation isn't something you force, it's something that returns when the load becomes manageable, and that's the mental model to remember. You are not an engine that needs more fuel. You are a traveler who sometimes needs to set things down. There may still be days when everything feels heavy, days when starting feels slow, days when the weight returns. That doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're human, living in a mind that learned to carry more than it should have. But slowly, gently, you can learn to notice the weight, to question it, to put some of it down. And one day, without realizing it, you may begin a task without that familiar heaviness. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped carrying everything alone. And sometimes that is what motivation really is. Not a burst of energy, but the quiet absence of unnecessary weight.